all of you here today. And I want to thank you all for joining us for today's uh, internship thesis internship report slash project presentation. And we would very much uh, like to just kind of introduce you to how we're going to be doing this today. And then I'm going to briefly introduce our main speaker of today, and then we'll move on. Today we're going to have a presentation from Sean. We'll then open it to the general group that's here for questions and information that you all have. Then we're going to politely ask you all to let us grill Sean alone, which is our job as his committee. We'll then actually kick Sean out for a couple of minutes, talk amongst ourselves, and then we'll call him back in for the big reveal. So I'm really looking forward to this. I've had the pleasure of working with Sean in the program. Sean and I sat down at one point and looked at what he wanted to do and where he wanted to end up and what we were going to need to get there. And Sean worked to get himself the opportunities that would allow him to get where he wants to be. Um, I hope Sean adds into the presentation at some point and where he is now and what his current most recently uh, appointed position is now. And on that note, I'm going to let Sean introduce his project and go into the presentation. And you should be able to share your screen, Sean.
Thank you, Norm. All right. Well, like Norm said, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. It's really cool to have this kind of turnout, especially with everything going on. So I'm probably going to fumble through this a little bit because I haven't used Zoom as much as some of the other folks. But again, this is my internship defense, and it's the South Carolina Local Food System Roadmap, an inventory and resource guide to the local value chain. Then these are all of my wonderful committee members who have been hanging on here for a couple of years, actually. So I definitely want to extend a massive thank you to them for being here today, and then, of course, throughout the entire project. Some of the sponsoring organizations who funded this project and, kind of had really wanted this to get done. Big one was the South Carolina Food Policy Council and the South Carolina Department of Agriculture. Resources were also gathered from Low Country Local First, Coastal Conservation League, and Grow Food Carolina. Another big ones that you might recognize, the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association. They had a massive report from 2013 that was crucial in providing a ton of critical data. The South Carolina Farm Bureau, the South Carolina Community Loan Fund, the Arnold School of Public Health at USC, Central Midlands Council of Governments, and then DHEC. So just an overview of the project. I was tasked with doing a literature review, looking at kind of the state of the industry in South Carolina, and then identifying that some of the issues within the value chain that are facing farmers. And this could be, a number of things: infrastructure related, economic related, COVID related. That obviously wasn't in my research prior to this year, but certainly something worth looking into. And then I was tasked with compiling infrastructure data, business data of participating businesses within the value chain. And this was done through ArcGIS Business Analyst, as well as state data sets and nonprofit data sets. 2017, actually 2018, the data was finally released after several government shutdowns, but the USDA does a 5-year census of agriculture, and I mean, they look at everything. And so I was tasked with digitizing some of that for the county and the state, and hoping to provide, another additional data set to pair with the infrastructure data to kind of explain maybe the spatial relationship that we're seeing with some of these businesses, and maybe why there's gaps or barriers within the value chain. And then another piece of it was to create a story map, which kind of, for those who are unfamiliar with a story map, is essentially an interactive, I want to say almost like an interactive map / textbook. It's accompanied with text and video and photo, but also maps that you can interact with. And then just like a normal GIS, it carries a ton of table data that you can use for analysis. And then we created several web apps for data exploration. So just some background information. Many of us are probably familiar with GIS. It's definitely rooted in geospatial science and geography, but it's definitely grown, into a lot more than what it used to be. Some of those online examples that we know of are the FEMA flood maps, traffic maps. Big ones that we've become accustomed to are the COVID-19 dashboards. We also business locations, Zillow, realtors, love these sort of interactive maps where you can put a chunk of data and also the spatial locations of all of these data points. And so the online mapping tools within GIS have really allowed people to not only interact with data, but also collect data and be part of that process. And so we're going to see more of that as we go forward in the future, I think, where people want to be involved more as part of data collection. And then the tools that we used for this project were ArcGIS Desktop, ArcGIS Pro, ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Story Maps, ArcGIS Web Builder, and then the ArcGIS Business Analyst. And so the agricultural value chain, sort of at the USDA did a kind of a week-long seminar, and they compiled all the definitions from researchers and participants, and kind of came up with the strategic alliance between farmers and ranchers and other supply chain partners that deal in significant volumes of high quality, differentiated food products and distribute rewards equitably across the chain. And so I do think that's a pretty good definition for this. I think the point that you really want to drive home is that it's on shared value, and then that value doesn't always have to be economic. There are a number of things that partnerships are surrounded on, and that could be just improving standards, ethical operations, and this is all driven by open communication. So it's about having a relationship with consistent business that allows for a greater rewards to be reaped by everybody involved in the process, and not just a few players scattered along the chain. And so the big points from the literature review is that farming has simply changed, that technology, equipment, uncertainty, all of these things have shaped an industry that has caused great disparities among some areas and a lot of success in others. So expenses has gone up tremendously due to technology and equipment being such crucial pieces. And it makes it really small for the small and mid-sized farms to remain competitive. So they're just unable to, do things at a capacity that some of these larger farms can do. And that drives down price. And so it's up for consumers to make the conscious choice to go out of their way to support small farms. But the issue is that they're often, unable to reach the market they want to reach due to lack of infrastructure and a number of things. And so we're seeing these large farms make it difficult for small farms because they're buying up property. Land is also going up tremendously. And the USDA report showed that just farmland is just highly sought after. And unfortunately, it's some of the most developed land within the United States. And so the literature is saying that farmers simply need support. And again, a lot of that is economic, but it's also just training, certifications, infrastructure. They need to be able to deliver their goods, store their goods, cold storage, equipment, again, is a really expensive thing. And then processing and marketing can be extremely difficult for just a small or mid-sized farm. And so our project for the data collection, we were looking at the NACE codes. And so that's a North American Industry Classification System. The federal government uses it to essentially gather data concerning businesses that are related to our economy. And so some of the examples of what we pulled were crop production, animal production, food manufacturing. And then all of these NACE codes are then further split into more specific businesses. And that could be as much as, soybean production. And so we can have sort of a breakdown of these businesses and where they're located within the state. For digitizing the local and state data sets, they were just simply geocoded from addresses. And the USDA Census of Agriculture data was a massive report. I mean, there's hundreds of pages with hundreds of lines of data. And so we took what we thought were of most interest to most people and digitized that by just joining it to the county. So we have county level data from the USDA census. And then the story map and web app development was, again, probably over 2 years. We worked with a number of folks who gave pictures, video from the South Carolina Department of Agriculture, video from Grow Food Carolina. They allowed me to tour the warehouse and take pictures. And then again, we crafted our narrative with some of the observed observations within the data. Sorry, y'all. And so our story map, we chose the tabular template. So for those of you that are familiar with that, you can kind of have maybe like pages that flip, or you can have tabs that, kind of look like web pages. And then you can also have a cascading scroll. And so our main story is that cascading scroll. And then the other 3 tabs are the web apps that allow for that data exploration that we've talked about. And so for our story, we focused on, again, the changes. So with the 2017 census, we were able to get the 10-year snapshot for county level data. And so this is really important because after 10 years, we can start to show a decent trend in where the industry is heading in terms of farm size, land use, the economics broken down from crop production. And then of course, you could break that down even further to the economics per item from, carrots to tomatoes to watermelons, which counties are making the most money and producing the most of these goods. And so we also wanted to highlight something that some folks may have run into just in shopping at the farmer's market, which is the meat processing barriers. So we've obviously heard a lot about that with COVID, that there are long waits, issues with, people getting COVID at these sites. I know just here, sometimes, they'll have to close the processing plant to things like bacon because they're only doing poultry. So we wanted to highlight that issue, that we have a ton of meat production here in the state, and that processing has become, a pretty big issue for a lot of farmers. And we also wanted to highlight the success from, getting that food from our farm to table. So we highlighted some of the food hubs in the Food Hub Network, Grow Food Carolina, and then the restaurants that many of us probably eat at which are directly sourcing food from these local farmers. Selling directly to consumers on a number of the surveyed farmers that was their biggest thing, was they like to do that because, again, it cuts out a ton of work as far as distributing, storage, that they're able to just bring their product right to people. So we wanted to highlight that as well. We also wanted to show the way in which we analyze the data and use business analysts. Business analyst is typically a tool used in community development. It focuses a lot on demographic data. It breaks it down to a ridiculous level where you can get a census tract and get the average amount that somebody spends on eggs, as well as, racial, religious, economic breakdown. So it helps give a further understanding of why the makeup of what we see is why it is. Um, and then, of course, what we hope to see for the future. Um, we want the industry to not have to continuously be, plagued with politics, environmental disaster. We want our farmers to be resilient enough to be able to do what they love, which is farm. And then the end was also a farmer resource guide. So that allows people to connect with businesses within the industry, broken down by category. And so this was a map that was simply generated by one of the web apps. So this is a tool that is available to all of you. You can use the print function, and it exports a nice map with, legend, scale. And again, you can zoom in and out of the map, but we chose to show the state to just show, the overwhelming presence of meat producers and only 2 USDA certified meat processors. And so again, this has some heavy implications on small and mid-sized farms who aren't able to process the meat themselves. They have long waits. Again, there's been, with COVID, farms that just have nowhere to take their livestock or their animals because there's just nobody that can process it right now. And so the idea of showing this data is to allow, decision makers, planners to really understand the severity of not having these available resources, and hope to build a more resilient industry that can stand against, economic and social and environmental turmoil that we've seen. And so again, this is just a screenshot from the Our Story portion of our story map. So again, we wanted to talk about how farmers are reaching out directly to consumers. And so we provided the state data of the certified roadside markets and farmers markets. So we have that throughout the state. And again, you can click on any of these icons. It'll show you their address, which days they're open, which months they're open, to again, promote that sort of interaction with farmers. Because for a lot of farmers, this is their form of marketing. This is the way that they get out in the community and form those relationships that are really important for the value chain. And then here in Charleston, again, a lot of these restaurants, Five Loaves, that's a regular spot for a lot of grad students. They're part of this Fresh on the Menu. So they, go out of their way to work together with food hubs and locally source the food in which they're serving. And so this app, we got permission to show their data. The app helps better connect people to restaurants, again, that are working together with farmers and those throughout the chain to provide, fresh produce, fresh meat, and things like that to our restaurants. And so the first web app, the way we broke it down was we have a web app with just the infrastructure data. And so that allows people to just see the data points. And so on the left, you'll see a list of the categories of businesses that we decided to show. And then the map is simply just showing food hubs with some of those locally sourcing restaurants. These are also processors and distributors. And you can see there's sort of that love-hate relationship with 26 because it runs through, our 3 major metropolitan areas. But then you can kind of see that there is sort of a neglect for food hubs, distributors, and processors out in Florence and Horry County and Myrtle Beach. And so there was, I believe, an attempt to get something started in that area, but it just proved to be the infrastructure wasn't there to facilitate it in the same way that Charleston, Columbia, and the Greenville, Spartanburg could support it. So it did ultimately fail, but I'm hoping that in the future there will be, the data like this will be used to sort of relook at that area and decide if there's a viable market option for something like that. And then the second app is going to be just the USDA Census of Agriculture. So it gives a 20-year snapshot at the state level and 10-year snapshot at the county level. And again, some of those data layers you're going to see are product sales, acreage, farm sizes, farm expenses, farm profits. And that allows us to see trends over time. And what we've noticed is that the number of small farms, this is less than 10 acres, is growing. So we're seeing a lot of backyard farms popping up, urban farms popping up. And then farms that are 1,000 acres or more are also growing. These are some of the big players that we know are moving to South Carolina because there is cheap land. It's got, 95, 26, it's got veins to a lot of major parts of the country. And then interestingly enough, profits are increasing, but so are expenses. So, um, I'm sorry, market value of goods sold is increasing, but expenses are increasing. So there are some counties where the average net profit for a farmer is actually negative. So that's definitely something worth looking into. And so some of the maps that we have, again, show the distribution of crop sales for 2017. So we can see in and around the Midlands is where, the most money is being made for crop production. And it is vastly similar with a few outliers for livestock. The largest was a coney, I might be pronouncing that incorrectly, for livestock. But a lot of the Midlands has seen huge improvements and increases in poultry farming, which has now become, one of the number one economic drivers for the industry. And so you may, if you ever, jump off of 26 and go through any of these areas, you may see some of these massive chicken houses. And then the Complete Data Explorer is both of these infrastructure data sets and the census data set paired. So we can start to see sort of the relationship between the two. And so one of the things that stood out to me is that Georgetown really doesn't have a ton of recognized markets. I think they have 4 for the county, and they do have 60K residents. Georgetown County is also, predominantly African American, and there is a lot of farming in the region, but there just isn't the infrastructure for whatever reason set up to get this locally sourced produce to local people. And so that was something we again wanted to highlight. And so why is this tool significant? Again, the data was sort of scattered all about. So we had to, pool together all of these resources to kind of try and get it in one spot so that somebody within the industry or politicians, legislatures can kind of sit back and look and say, wow, we have these, these huge gaps, and that is why, this community isn't being served, or that's why these farmers are having trouble, making money or reaching certain markets. And so we wanted to help identify some of those successes, failures, and of course the barriers. And then the biggest thing is when you just look at the infrastructure data is what's available and what's not. So we see, again, our food hubs are in our 3 major cities, but are kind of absent from the rest of the state. And that may be because that's the only way in which they can function, is that they have to aggregate product right there in that metropolitan area to then quickly distribute to the restaurants who then serve it to us. And we wanted to avoid the redundant efforts and, again, just sort of improve efficiency in planning. We don't want grant money to go wasted. We don't want people to try and accomplish the same thing, because the entire value chain is rooted in, sort of cooperation, open communication. And so that's one of the main reasons we wanted to provide this, is so that people could make data-backed decisions. They weren't just kind of going off of what they thought or what they assumed, but now they have something in front of them that can, help at least spatially drive some of these decisions. And so some of the challenges that we ran into, because I think this is important for a lot of people who want to do a project with story maps and web apps and just data like this in general, is that it's a living, breathing thing. I mean, just with the last year, I can only imagine that there have been a number of businesses that have unfortunately gone out of business. And some of those will be most likely those locally sourcing restaurants, could be farmers, could be a number of things. And so it's just kind of hard to keep up with the data. And so we were fortunate that the South Carolina Department of Ag is going to work to sort of upkeep the data and keep it as recent as possible. And then for this project, again, the perfect data set just doesn't exist. Retail data was very hard to capture in terms of, are they providing local produce? And so we kind of opted not to go the retail route because other than those certified roadside markets, because it was just too hard to tell through the NACE codes, which don't go specific enough to local produce. Whether again it was present in their grocery stores, a lot of things that were captured, sort of like fishing with a giant net. You're going to catch a bunch of stuff you don't want, and so it took too long to cut through the retail to actually get something that we thought was going to be helpful. And so again, it was just a lot to get the various shape files, Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, resource guides, and get all of this together. And the search for data, it just never ends, because again, there's going to be new businesses that pop up today, and there's going to be businesses that close tomorrow. And so, we're encouraged to get folks also to further this project. And again, there's USDA Census of Agriculture data that you could sit for the next year and probably digitize if you wanted. And so that brings me to our future recommendations. And so for me, I thought that, there should be further research into the infrastructure that's needed to meet local demand. So a lot of the literature showed that in South Carolina, we buy 90% of our food from out of state. And a lot of our food that we make here gets shipped out of state. But we have a demand for local produce and local meat. It's just there's not the infrastructure, or there's a breakdown somewhere within the chain to meet that. And so my hope is for more research into that and how we can improve, keeping the food that's produced here and allowing it to be sold to those of us here in the region. And again, as I've already touched on, the USDA census data, I think there's just endless useful layers that could be added to this that just dive way more specific. I probably will hopefully end up adding it with permission of Nikki, but I'd like to add by like vegetable type or by meat type, which counties are producing the most. But the data that came from the USDA Census of Agriculture, unfortunately, just had a ton of symbols and spaces and just things that aren't GIS friendly. So that would be a recommendation to them going forward, is to create it in a way that is more friendly for digitizing, because spatially, lines and lines of that data, you can't really see anything, but spatially you can pull things out right away and visually. And so that would be my recommendation for that. And then of course, just with the last year and what we're have going forward, a post-COVID assessment of our value chain. I mean, those were some of the first things that came out of the pandemic, was that everything is broken down, the value chain, the deliveries, people not working, restaurants had to simply close because they couldn't access what they needed to serve. And so we saw a lot of really innovating things pop out of this. Grow Food Carolina, they had a ton of extra produce because of all this. So then they set up a box that was then donated to those in need. And so again, I would really want to know what are the, kind of short-term and long-term effects that something like a pandemic, or for us, it could be even, repeated hurricanes is going to have on the appeal of farming. Because as we know, farming it's an aging industry. I think the average farmer is in their 50s or 60s, and a lot of young people are not being driven to being involved. Mostly because I don't think they know in the unique ways in which they can be involved, which could be work like this or marketing, social media. Farmers struggle because they don't have the ability to be, 10 different things. Mostly they just want to farm. But unfortunately, they also have to, be masters of business and marketing, social media. And it's becoming too much for what consumers are asking for. And so again, my recommendation is for future students to do everything they can to give farmers the tools they need to be successful. So for those of you who are interested and maybe able to write this down, I can also bring it up and we can walk through it if we have any questions. But the map is housed at the South Carolina Food Policy Council's website under initiatives. And then you can just go to the SC Local Food System Roadmap. And again, you can go through the entire narrative story and then explore the infrastructure data, the census data, and then both of the data sets combined. And so with that, I will, with Norm, open the floor to questions. I think you can do so with I think Lucy said a raising hand button. I know I sound like somebody's grandpa, as well as the chat. And then of course you can just, I assume through audio, ask any questions.
Right.
Yeah.
So two things. Sean, if you would type the SC food website into the chat so that everybody
Oh,
can
into the
have a
chat.
link
Yes, you
to
got
it.
it.
All right. As I said, we're going to open up for questions at this point, and feel free either to put them into the chat toward everyone or directly toward me, or go ahead and unmute yourself. We'd love questions and comments at this point.
Well, I'll start, Sean. I have no shame whatsoever here, you know. But seriously, I am curious. You know what? I could have never told you that there were that many meat processing operations in South Carolina, and so I'm kind of wondering, what do they do? Do you have any idea?
There may have been a misunderstanding. There were 2 USDA meat processors
Right.
for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of livestock farmers. Did I misunderstand the question?
Well, there were a lot of dots on South Carolina.
Yes, and
If you
so
go back to that picture,
yes, of
go
course.
back to that slide.
So the blue dots or the teal dots are the meat producers. So these are the farmers who are engaging in livestock, poultry, pork, those sorts of things. And then the 2 that you see out in Williamsburg and then out in the Anderson area, those are the 2 USDA meat processors who allow for farmers to bring meat there that can then be processed and then shipped out of state or international. So there's a ton of bottlenecking that happens because there's only 2 for the entire state.
Right.
And so I just, when we went to the James Island Farmers Market, wanted bacon, and R&R Farms said it's going to be at least a month or 2 because they're not processing that at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, I see. So what do they do? Batch process, kind of, based on you know, beef or chicken or.
I think they kind of have to have a schedule, unfortunately, which doesn't work for everyone, and that's just one of the root issues is that.
Yeah.
You know, if your livestock and things need to be slaughtered during a certain time, and if you can't meet that, I'm not honestly sure what people are doing
Yeah.
with livestock that they can't get through the process.
Sean, what about the small? Did you capture the small processors who do like the things for the hunters, and like there's one in Ravenel.
We opted not to include that. I would have to defer to Nikki, but there were several that did process like game meat, but we didn't include that because they wouldn't take cattle, pork, or chicken from farmers.
Yeah, that's important.
But I mean, you would think those processors would maybe want to open their business up to something like that. But again, it's getting that USDA certification that allows them to take the product out of state and internationally if that's desired. But and of course, some places, the bigger farms do it in-house, and that gives them a highly competitive advantage against the smaller farms who don't have that capacity.
Yeah.
And Norm, to answer your question, I think ultimately we do have that as a data layer as SCDA certified processors versus the USDA, but it doesn't appear on this image because this image was about the ability to export.
Right.
So I'll have to double check if that made the final cut of data. And that, again, to highlight Sean's point, it comes down to how do you determine a business's available processing ability per animal And a lot of these folks, it changes week to week. It's not like it's on their website. It doesn't have anything to do with their NACE codes. So you would have to manually call every single one of those deer processors to find out, do you process hogs? If so, what season? Because during deer season, they all close completely to non-deer processing.
Mm.
So it's very, this is, to me, I think Sean and I became very clear that mapping is an awesome tool, but it really falls short with these dynamic local food systems in which you need to have the ability to demonstrate there's variability and that there's serious limitations that are involved around manpower.
And I think the image that Kent was referring to was the one that shows the food processors and hubs image.
I think that was, it was restaurants and food hubs.
No. I'm pretty sure I'm looking at it right now. I went into the data set. Food hubs, distributors, and processors looks like there are more of them. And if you're thinking of them as processors as opposed to the hubs, then that would look like there were more.
Yeah, that would capture that data.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and this is where, again, it's like, this is always going to be a work in progress, but I think it's very important to be explicit about the limitations of the data so that
Right.
folks aren't trying to make hard-nosed decisions based on this, not realizing that there's nuance.
Yeah, that's a great point, I think.
What, data has nuance? Wow. Sorry.
But people really don't realize that. It's kind of amazing.
Do we have any questions from our general audience at this point? Anything you all would like to know or clarifications about it?
Hi, this is Amanda. I had a question.
Yeah.
Sean, you were talking about the USDA data sets that you got from them. You were saying that it was just kind of cryptic in a way and there were spaces. Do you mean like missing data by that? And also, how do we move forward with making that data more transdisciplinary, right? For GIS specialists to work on it, as well as maybe even social scientists to even use that data. And do you think that there's efforts to do that, or does it seem kind of static right now, the way that they're managing their databases?
Sure. Thank you for that question. What I was trying to say is that the way the PDFs and the Excel spreadsheets are broken into, GIS is very sensitive. The data that is joined to a feature, it can't have any strange symbols, spaces, periods. And that's all this, unfortunately, this spreadsheet was full of. So I had to go through and eliminate any of these symbols that would have, caused the join to fail. For me, I would personally love for the USDA to simply create shape files and release them, the same way that FEMA releases flood maps. I think that's well within their power, because I was able to do some of it. So if they dedicated, a team, because again, the spreadsheet data, it's way more powerful, and it's way more useful to people if it's in just a visual format. Because again, they do this, county profiles, and they are extremely in depth. So that again, that would be my push and recommendation, is to have a mapping team responsible. Now that could also be done at the state level. Here in South Carolina, it doesn't need to just rely on USDA. South Carolina Department of Agriculture or a team of grad students could do it as a project if it's grant funded, to digitize as much as possible. Because again, I think that change over time is extremely useful in showing where we're going to have further complications, and seeing the expenses double, triple since '97, and the net profits for farmers not go up as much. It's simply just squeezing any money that farmers are getting out of farming. So yeah, I would definitely definitely recommend that the USDA somehow make it a little bit more friendly, or again, provide shape files if possible. But again, it's intensive.
Thanks.
I have a question too.
Okay, hang on. Annette is next, and then Lucy.
Okay, Norm is keeping track. Sean, that's a great presentation, and thanks for all this work. It really seems like it helps move the ball a little bit on agricultural decision making in the state, and I appreciate that, and I'm sure a lot of people in the future will appreciate that. And so I want to follow up on a question that Norm started us off with at the beginning, to ask you where you are now. And for the benefit of all the new students and existing students that are on this call, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what kind of skills that you took from doing this project to bring into what you're doing now in general.
Sure. So I work at Charleston County in the building inspections department. I work in floodplain management. Some of you might be familiar with Katie Faith. I worked with her for some time, and we did a ton of things. We do grant work. Obviously, we deal with the FEMA flood maps, which are going to be rolled out later this month, which is going to have huge implications for much of the county. And so one of our biggest tools at the county is our FEMA flood maps, which again is a web app just like this. It's an online viewer. It's used by land surveyors, home builders, homeowners, just about everybody uses it. And I would say there are very, very few people at the county who can do anything with ARC Online, because one, it's relatively new. So if you weren't fortunate enough, like myself, to take many classes with Norm, you'd have to teach yourself the program, which is, I'm assuming, what happened at the county. And so we created a number of web apps to use for our community rating system visit. They basically were like, hey, we need a map of wetlands in the county. And I, very quickly borrowed the data from US Fish and Wildlife and created a map. We threw it up on the website and we got points for it. And so I use GIS just about every other day. Grants need maps. That's, they need to know exactly where this drainage project's going to go. And so we're going to kind of borrow some stuff from the city, is that we want to create a web app that shows drainage projects throughout our jurisdictions in the county, so that folks can have more transparency into what's going on with flooding and what's being done about it. And so I couldn't be more thankful to Norm and the rest of my committee for allowing me to do a project like this, because again, it 100% gave me the tools to be, I think, highly employable. Because again, you just have a leg up on people with ARC Pro, again, newer program that some people are unfamiliar with and having to teach themselves. It's just much easier to go through a class and work with ARC Pro, ARC Online, story maps, as well as business analysts. It makes you highly appealing to employers.
I'd also like to point out that Sean, it is a certified floodplain manager as well, that he's done the extra coursework externally for that rating. We have a couple of them who have come through our program, and I'm very, very happy for that. And when Katie has shifted, what's your official title as well, Sean?
Actually, I think Anna's in here too. Anna and I are both going to be floodplain coordinators for Charleston County. Now that Katie has moved on to Folly Beach, she's very lucky. I think she might be on here. But a massive thank you to Katie. She kind of was my floodplain mentor along with Norm over the last 2 years, and has quickly brought me up to speed. So definitely a big thanks to them.
Yep, I'm here. I'm just going to shout out Sean because it's been a pleasure working with him. I will continue to work with him through Folly Beach, but I'm not going to steal his thunder here, but very excited for him and Anna to be working together. And I really hope that more of the MES.MPA students can get into the county. It's a great way to kind of learn about government work and really cultivate those skills. And they pay for your training to be a floodplain manager if you want to. So there's some really great benefits with that. But super proud of Sean for everything that he's done here. It's a great project and definitely translates into the work and benefits the county very greatly.
Thanks, Katie. Lucy, did you have a question?
I did. I wasn't sure if it was my turn yet. Yes. First, yeah, I was gonna say, I think he's going to the pool. Fantastic job, Sean. That was a great presentation. I have a little bit more of an applied question, and I'm not sure if you looked into it, but how does this data compare to other states? I think it's really interesting that there's only 2 processors, really like larger processors in this area. And I just didn't know what the comparison was to other states or other nearby states that maybe function similarly to us.
North Carolina did a very similar project, and we borrowed some of the methodology from them. I was just reading this morning that North Carolina has months to possibly year waits for their processing because, again, COVID is such an issue. You have so many people that need to be working in tight spaces that Tyson made the news, for having to shut down one of their major plants. And I mean, that's millions of dollars for shutting down something like that. So I think everybody was most likely, from the literature said that infrastructure is clearly a barrier for farmers, that this is not, Vermont had meat processing and vegetable processing issues in the news, North Carolina, us, it's clearly just a prevalent issue within the industry. And I'm not sure why. I don't know enough about the economics of meat processing, but I imagine that those that are in the business do fairly well. So you would think they would just sprout up out of, capitalism. You need something that makes money and you would just do it. But there must be a lot more to it than I understand because, again, the one that you'll see the most is Williamsburg Packing Company. Anything that you buy is probably processed by them. So next time you go to the farmer's market or any of the local retailers who carry that stuff, check the label. It's going to most likely come out of Williamsburg. And they're the ones that are just unfortunately plagued with long wait times. And the literature who surveyed farmers said that's one of their biggest things is that they need consistent business. They can't do this because it's their livelihood. And for a lot of them, they're not making a ton of money. A lot of them do it because it's a generational thing and they love it. And they would rather do that than anything else. And so I think it's up for everybody else to, again, we need to kind of reassess and rebuild the appeal of the industry. There's a lot of really cool stuff from manual labor all the way up to high tech drones. Drones are making it into the industry as far as surveying the health of crops. I think we had Brad did his thesis project on drones and wineries. So I mean, there's just so much cool stuff that can be done within the industry. We just have to show everybody and get everybody involved as much as possible. But again, a lot of it comes down to consumers making that choice to go out of their way to, go to the farmer's market instead of just going to Walmart. And again, just forming that relationship.
Awesome, thanks. Nikki,
Norma, awesome, thank you. Yeah, if anyone has questions about the meat piece, I'm happy to expand upon that, but you can look up the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network, and Rebecca Thistlethwaite has published some great articles about why it's hard to be a small to mid-sized processor. But to build on your last statement, Sean, what would you like to see this map used for by future grad students? Like if there was a grad student coming after you that had access to this map,
Sure.
Where do you think there's opportunities for people to change the data, adjust the data, maybe pull your data sets off the back end and push them into a new map? Like how do you visualize it being used?
Definitely. Again, I think a big place to build off it is what a lot of people want to know is retail, is where they can find local products. But the issue is, I think they would essentially have to do site visits to, I can't think of a way in which you could collect business data for only grocery stores or chains that have local products. I think you would have to site visit. Previously, we had the idea of maybe working with, extension agents or county offices to try and vet the data, but it just proved to be too much of an endeavor. But I imagine there's tons of people out there who are more innovative than I am and could possibly come up with a way to query a search that does that, or at least does it in a better way than I was able to. Because again, you would think you were searching and going to get great data, and it would be, a gas station chain that, sold apples and bananas, but like that's not what we were looking for our map. So definitely in the retail data, something I wanted to do that I just didn't get to would again be to focus more on the USDA census data that focuses on the products themselves, which counties are producing what, to what extent, and how much money that's worth. I think that information is extremely valuable. So again, I may take that on as just a side project to make sure that that's added. I think, kind of understanding not just the economics, but the sheer acreage. And again, there was some stuff being grown here that I had no idea, but there were, a dozen farmers growing it in the upstate. So I think that sort of information is valuable in terms of people realizing what they can get just from farmers here within our own state. Oh, Norm, you're muted.
I looked up at my screen and saw my little red microphone on. All righty, I'll learn yet. Only a year into this, pretty much. Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. What we're going to do is we're going to ask those who are not on Sean's committee to head out, and we will then ask him a few direct questions and move forward into our next phase.
Congratulations,
you,
Sean.
Sean.
Nicely done.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Lucy, do you want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.